Welcome back. Once again, adventurers, let's play ChäoS. And in the last episode, Takumi finally managed to get his PC operating system up and running again. Delighted at the fact that, the fact that he managed to get back at the Ensu with all of his save data and with the lightning fast night heart alive and intact. Unfortunately, a certain individual has finally returned to the Ensu chat room. And it isn't Grim, it's Shogun. Someone who we haven't seen since that strange night at the Shibuya Scramble. And of course, completely terrified out of his wits now, Takumi attempted to phone Rimi over at Suimei Academy. Unfortunately, all he received was the fact that he was being sent to a voicemail instead of actually having her materialize out of nowhere to save him as usual. And given this fact, Takumi's nerves are completely and absolutely frazzled right about now, which has led to this situation right here. And of course, given the fact that we're in chapter 6, there is only one road we can go down at this point. And unfortunately, it is going to be the road of terror at this particular juncture. It's probably fitting, given how utterly distraught Takumi is. We have chosen our path, and there is no turning back. At some point my body had started trembling. I dreaded Shogun even more than I thought. Of course I did. He was a serial killer who'd caused 5 incredibly cruel incidents, all the while pretending to be disabled. And I was his next mark. The sound of someone banging on the door came just then, as if they'd waited for the right timing.
Rimi!
It was Rimi. Rimi had come for me after all. Feeling as though my salvation had arrived, I headed for the door. I wonder about that. But I stopped partway there.
Huh?
Why was she pounding so hard?
Rimi!
I tried calling out to the person behind the door. The knocking stopped at once. That's a bit disquieting. Silence. No reply. Give me some kind of answer. Why won't you say anything?
Rimi! なんでしょう。答えてよ。
I don't think so. And more knocking. Without offering a reply, they started hammering at the door again. Was it Rimi? she would have answered.
誰だ誰なんだ
Of course, if Takumi opens that door, he couldn't be inviting himself for a world of trouble. Surely not Shogun. Once I started harboring suspicions, I lost the courage to open the door and determine who stood beyond it. I retreated slowly until, at last, I hit the backrest of my chair. Seems like the walls are closing in, literally, trapped in our little box. The knocking went on and on all the while. Somebody kept on knocking. No, it wasn't just that. The sound of knocking began reverberating from the side walls and the ceiling as well. Unless somebody has actually managed to find a way to climb on top of the container, that is a bit odd. The person outside wasn't alone.
誰だよ
Unable to tamp down my fear, I shouted. And as if in reaction to my voice, the sound stopped at once. If someone is clearly outside, much to Takumi's discomfort, I wanted to flee. I wanted to run away. I wanted to go far away from this place immediately. But there is only one way in and one way out. But how? Surely there was some mystery group surrounding the container housing from outside. Noises began to resonate again. This time, rather than a knocking sound, it was a rather unpleasant sound of fingernails scratching. Being unable to see my opponent's forms only strengthened my fear. I knew Shogun had instigated them, but I couldn't imagine what these people who were harassing me from the single walls with the way possibly looked like. Could we in fact be under a psychological attack? Goosebumps stood up all over me, and revulsion heightened my nausea. Oh dear, the situation is getting even more dire. I covered my eyes hard.
やめてやめてよ許してよ
I don't think they're gonna do that. But of course, 'twas just a dream. Shogun has left the room. Good to know. When I turned back, I was still in front of my PC monitor. I looked around the center of the room with a gasp. Still in that position, I listened stealthily. No sound. Had I imagined it? Possibly. For 5 minutes I went on paying close heed to conditions outside the container house, too terrified to move a finger. In the end, I didn't sense anybody's presence, and I opened the door a crack to look outside, just in case. No one was there. Had it been a delusion? But even now my heart seemed as though it were about to be crushed by anxiety. I set my eyes back to the monitor. Shogun had already departed from the chat. The traces he left behind him consisted of only 4 lines. Indeed. Of course, bringing Rimi into this might not actually be such a good idea after all, because She didn't seem to believe that Shogun was there at the pedestrian crossing that night, and if she were to come now, she would probably reassure Takumi by saying, "There is absolutely nobody by the name of Shogun," which would actually, understandably, do the opposite, because Shogun does exist. Not even wanting to see Not wanting to see even those words, I hurriedly got myself out of the chat room now that Shogun had vanished. My trembling still wouldn't stop. Shogun was challenging me. I wonder what Shogun's quote-unquote present might be. What could be so enjoyable about dogging me? Had Shogun finally resumed his activity, having selected me as his new victim? Or was I the most convenient person for him to pin his crimes on?
誰か助けて助けてよ
I gazed desperately at the post-awakening Serotan.
一人は怖いんだ
I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to have someone by my side. I wanted to have someone to protect me.
そうだ学校だ学校へ行けば
Probably not a school day on his minimum attendance sheet chart, but if I went to school, Rimi would be there. I couldn't endure spending more anxious time here on my own. I took off the thoroughbred trainers I wore as house slippers, hastily put on my uniform, and left my base. Actually, I wonder what time it is outside. Oh, it's daylight. That's good. It is daytime. Going into the cold outdoor air made my headache somewhat milder. A more restless atmosphere than usual hung about the city. Perhaps it was due to the earthquake and the phenomena that followed it. Sirens rang out unceasingly far off in the distance. I couldn't tell whether they were from fire trucks or ambulances. Most likely both. Probably a good call. Yamate Street, 1 block away from where I was walking now, had become increasingly congested. Numerous cars had caused head-on collisions and then had been left there in the middle of the road. I didn't see their drivers anywhere. The traffic was the fault of those abandoned cars, and the other drivers all honked on and on, as if they were going insane, which they probably are given the situation. As I stumbled my way towards school, a lone dog cut in front of me, howling as it crossed my path. Wonder where that dog came from. It was a chihuahua with bloodshot eyes, dragging its leash behind its short body as it sprinted with all its might. So even the animals have been affected by whatever this was. Huge globs of drool hung from its open mouth. It must have gotten separated from its owner. As I tore it off absent-mindedly, I caught my toe on something and almost fell over. There was a fissure in the asphalt, with one side slightly higher than the other. This must be due to the earthquake. I stopped there and looked up at the sky. A few small clouds floated, carefree, in the midst of its dim blue. Of course, we know that the sky wasn't like that during the earthquake, but it seems to have resumed its natural colors. Immediately following the earthquake, it had apparently turned white, as if it were one giant aurora, but I couldn't spot traces of that anywhere. That was because you were inside the shipping container that entire time. This wasn't the usual Shibuya. Not anymore, it's not. I simply couldn't calm down. First New Gen, and now this. It wasn't merely because of the earthquake's influence. It wasn't merely because of my migraine. Not only that, a certain urge threatened to rack me. What kind of urge is that, I dread to think. I was only walking around. For some reason, I really felt like I might want to kill someone. A very terrible feeling, and an unnatural one. By the time I reached the school gates, my anxiety and terror had grown stronger and stronger. Of course, it's probably too late to visit classes now, but looks like Takumi's own sole remaining hope is finding Rimi at school. I had chills. I wouldn't stop shaking. My headache resurged. That's unfortunate. When I looked more closely, there were people packed around the seniors building. I tried to spot Rimi there. Mysteriously, every single one of them was alike in how they looked up at the top of the school building.
Oh, Taku!
And there's Daisuke. Mizumi-kun came running up to me. Excellent. I've asked him where Rimi was.
お前、今日学校来てたんだな。
We just got here.
いや、そんなん今はどうでもいいから。
Even Daisuke looks concerned. That is a very foreboding portent. He spoke with a terrible sobriety, and his expression was pale. One rarely saw him so shaken. Indeed. What on earth could have happened? We're probably going to learn that.
マジで。やばいよな。あれ。
Did something happen following the earthquake? Bad. What was? There's everyone pointing
病気だったん
upwards.
だろ
She? What are they talking about?
精神病のことがバレて余計におかしくなっちゃったらしいぜ。
Oh dear. I think I know.
さっき飛べるとか言ってたぜ。やべえよ。やばすぎる。
Even though I know the identity of who they're referring to, I think these students are probably even
俺、
crazier.
人が死ぬとこマジで見てんだけど。
As I
き
said,
っとグロすぎて最高だぜ。
yeah, whatever happened during the earthquake, the phenomenon that literally caused Takumi to have a psychological breakdown has clearly affected these people's minds.
早く落ちてこねえかな。
Such conversations entered my ears from around us. Maybe I had an unpleasant premonition. Following the other students' gazes, I tentatively looked up at the school building. Only one person is there. At the edge of the roof stood a single girl. One we all know all too well, don't we, Takumi? She held her D-sword, the same one as from the concert. Her pose was that of one lifting a prayer to God in the heavens. And of course, given what we've learned about her current history, that psychological attack during the earthquake would have had a serious effect on her mind than most. Ayase Kishimoto stood there. Oh dear.
So の体は邪神の影に潜む。
目には映らない存在。
Maybe Ayase is upset over the fact that people finally dug up her past history. Or maybe she too is traumatized by whatever it was that afflicted her mind. Ayase Kishimoto felt the wind. A chilly wind had begun to carry with it the faint hint of winter. As she entrusted her body to the wind, her expression was very anguished, and drops of sweat rolled down her cheeks.
離れようとも離れようとも冷めぬ悪夢は
Like she is very badly traumatized. The Suimei Academy roof was surrounded by a metal fence nearly 2 meters high. Ayase was currently standing in the barely 30-centimeter space that lay outside it. She had already been standing there for over 10 minutes. If she took another step forward, she would fall from the 4-story high school roof. Many students had gathered below. They watched Ayase with bated breath. Something tells me this isn't going to end well.
剣となりてこの身を切り裂くのだろう
And she's uttering the very poem that was discovered while she was a patient at Arcot. People long since contacted the police and emergency medical services, but they hadn't arrived on the spot yet, due in part to their needing to respond to the earthquake of several hours earlier, which means that no one else is here to help. The teachers darted around to prepare a landing mat, in case worst came to worst.
無関心という名の盾で戦火を免れる人々
But Ayase stretched out her back, standing up straight as if the ruckus below had nothing to do with her. It appeared, in fact, as if she were deliberately attempting to sever anything tying her interests to the world below. Raising her chin to look up at the sky, she closed both eyes. She resembled a shrine maiden praying up to heaven. Perhaps because she had a good sense of balance. Her body didn't waver whatsoever in the small wind. Never mind the fact that she was carrying a colossal sword, one approximately as tall as she was, in her right hand. Of course, there are only 2 people that can actually observe the sword in this situation. Ayase herself and Takumi Nishijo from below.
神聖なる戦場の敵は心の内の悪意なる
That sword, her D-sword, was radiating a pale light, blinking painfully on and off, as though synchronizing with its blinking. Agonized sighs fell from Ayase's lips, and a weak, thin whisper came leaking out with them.
悪意は時として意志を持ちそしてその姿を表す
The poetry woven by her whisper soon was erased in the wind. Ayase opened her eyes and ran her gaze across the subdued sky that lay over Shibuya's cluttered buildings.
この世界は悪意の妄想に満ち溢れている
Indeed it is. And unfortunately, Ayase, I have to admit, you yourself are contributing to those delusions.
みんな他人の不幸が大好き目を閉じても耳を塞いでもダメ 昔からずっと私のそばを離れてくれないわ。
What do you mean by they? As she murmured, she brought her enormous sword up to her chest. She embraced it gently with both arms. Mysteriously, that sharp-looking sword placed not a single wound on her body.
帰りたかった。大いなる意志が住むもう一つの世界に。そのために心を切り刻んで全部受け入れたわ。混沌の器としての夢を。
Ayase's expression contorted in grief. Quiet tears spilled from her eyes. Those voicelessly wept teardrops danced into space, borne away by the wind.
だけどグラジオールの帯同が活発化している。
Indeed. We've heard that name Glacial before. From the wiki site that Takumi himself had stumbled upon while trying to research the D-sword in general. That is the medieval version of the D-sword, not the spectacular weapons that are wielded by Ayase and Senna, which are completely separate from that that medieval legend. But it seems that Ayase has taken that medieval legend at face value
もう時間がないのに。
and believes in it wholeheartedly.
見つからない。見つからないのよ。天国の扉も賢者も導き手も七つの神罰も。
There's only one answer to that. They're all
黒騎士の
delusions.
伝説は本当なの？歌はもうたくさん歌ったわ。それで足りないって言うなら。
Seems to me that medieval legend was what inspired her lyrics and ultimately the existence of Phantasm to begin with.
大いなる意志よ。
If there is a great will out there, Ayase, it's not the one you're thinking of. Trust me on this. Ayase slowly spread her arms out on either side, as though to embrace the sky itself, as though to indicate her existence to a distant and high-up god.
私は飛ぶわ。
The pale pulsing of her sword increased in ferocity. Ayase closed her eyes for a second time. At that moment, a final tear overflowed from the corners of her eyes.
お願い、この器は差し出すから。魂を連れて行って。
And she stepped forward without a moment's hesitation. And with nothing there to hold up her body,
帰るべき場所へ。
Ayase sensed the chilly wind tenderly stroking her cheek and felt that she had been freed from everything. And so she falls. Helpless, all I could do was watch. When Ayase spread out her arms out on both sides, she slowly stepped into thin air, as though an invisible stairway lay there. Screaming and a general roar overflowed from the spectators all at once. Ayase lost its support like a puppet whose strings have been cut, and she flew inverted through the air. Everything went into slow motion. Ayase's body plummeted down. Her rate of descent was horribly slow, but she was definitely falling. Dying. She would die. I couldn't save her. It would be impossible to save her falling from that height. Moreover, below her was concrete. Her bones would shatter, her innards would be crushed, her spinal fluid would come bursting out, and blackish blood would spray every which way. If only a flower bed or something were there. I'm not sure a flower bed would actually help her in this situation. If only it were soft soil. I don't think that would work either. Then maybe she would survive. You are really not understanding how physics work at this point in time. I didn't want to see the moment of anyone's death. I was about to close my eyes. That instant, I felt it. A tingling at the nape of my neck. I turned around. No one was watching me. Everyone was either facing down or looking up. Whose eyes are those eyes? Oh dear. A sound resonated. Sounds of falling. It was the first time I'd heard it. That sound was unexpectedly soft. Wait, what?
まさか
Beside me, Mizumi-kun widened his eyes, stunned. Though his line of sight ought to have been pointing to the place where Ayase landed, his gaze was filled with more of a powerful surprise than with horror or sorrow. Not only Mizumi-kun, all of the spectators, wearing expressions of incomprehension, went speechless.
生きて
Alive? Huh? Alive. And lo and behold, Ayase lay fallen. I couldn't tell whether or not her bones had shattered. I couldn't tell whether or not her innards had turned to pulp. Her spinal fluid hadn't come lashing out. Blackish blood hadn't flown everywhere. A frail but certain groan spilled from Ayase's mouth. She was alive and intact. She appears to have lost consciousness and didn't budge an inch, but she had almost no visible injuries. Only minor trace of blood on her forehead. Wait, how did that work? Even though she'd fallen from the roof, she lay collapsed there, all but unhurt, on a flower bed. And that raises a very important question.
花壇に
I'm glad you asked that for me, Takumi. Had there been a flower bed there? To answer that question, there was nothing but concrete. And now there is a flower bed, just as Takumi wished.
予定と結果に大きな違いがあったようだが
And we're back with the trio at Nozomi, and lo and behold, these three are the ones who are responsible for the earthquake and of course the phenomenon that ultimately took place. But that is going to mark the end of this episode of Let's Play ChäoS, and when we return, we shall see just how far these three's plans have ultimately gone. As always, adventurers, until next we meet.